And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lassi Liikkanen. I'm very proud to open up a very kind of new chapter in the event series of Data-Driven Design Day. This year, I'm giving you greetings from Box by Posti, a facility here in downtown Helsinki, where we've gathered with very small audience. But luckily, this year's event has been saved, or at least we're trying to save it with the digital technology. So instead of having 300 people around here in a quite small space, we have the audience around the world, and only our speakers and myself here in the kind of center of things. But we're looking forward to have one small, very nice day around design, data, and everything else. This is the 6th annual version of it. I've been able to, I've had the pleasure of creating these events in a row, and even though you can have a chance to attend the poll and tell us whether you've been attending any of the previous year's events or not. But if you haven't, you'll be able to find an archive containing video recordings of the previous years, and in the future also this year's recordings will be present. And one way to find them is through the DDDD2020.wordpress.com. There are YouTube video playlists for your pleasure. But this year, despite kind of very unusual circumstances and arrangements, we have very nice lineup of speakers. We're going to have 8 presentations this year and almost 16 speakers. And one kind of wonderful change that we have, particularly for this year, is that for some kind of unintentional reason, we've been able to kind of tip the scale in terms of the gender balance in speakers, so that we have one more female speaker than male. This is kind of unusual for this line of work in technology or design area. But I'll talk about the program a little bit more before we get into it. I'm going to first say a few words about how I personally see the data-driven design, what it's all about. Then we are going to peek into the program. I will give you a few tips about using the online platform. And that's about it. And then we'll have 8 wonderful presentations in a row. Well, not in a row, but until like 3 p.m. this afternoon. But I will first start by giving kind of my personal opinion about what happens with data-driven design. As this is already the 6th year that I'm running the program, I've had to give some thought about what's inside data-driven design, and I've written a couple of professional magazine articles over the years where I've been trying to describe my kind of understanding of the topic. And as I personally see it, I'd call it like mostly as a disruption in design research, which basically opens up new possibilities for design inspiration and decision making. And one important thing for me is that you shouldn't, when we're trying to describe this thing, this practice, is not to get too much stuck on the word driven or data-driven. It might as well be called data-inspired, data-informed, or data-aware, whatever you like. I actually have a poll on the Hopin platform, if you can find it soon enough, which will enable you to kind of express your opinion, what would be the appropriate wording. But the kind of most important ideal is that we could, for instance, use the word data-informed. But the important thing is to understand that and avoid the implication that there's any kind of single source of data that drives the decisions or creates the inspiration. But the decision in design should always be made with many data sources. This is a quotation from a wonderful book released earlier this year from Roniko Havi, Diana Tang, and Jaak Su, all kind of prominent, well, data scientists or statisticians, whatever you want to call them. The book is called Trustworthy Online Controlled Experiments. And it's definitely great reading for anyone who has any interest or is practically engaged with doing any online experiments. It's very like scientifically based and very precisely written. And of course, it's also once more has kind of unusual lineup of having 2 female authors and only like 1 single white male. So good development on that area as well. But when in this quotation there was mentioned that there should be many data sources, and one kind of way to think about the data sources is what we've been usually using in the domain is to talk about qualitative data or quantitative data. Or another kind of similar pair of concepts would be a thick data and big data. The thick data and big data concepts have been popularized by Tricia Wang, ethnographer and actually former Nokia employee. And she has kind of very nicely illustrated what does it mean to have kind of mix of the big data and thick data, like details and a very big picture. And you can find similar type of ideas from also another quite recent book by John Maeda. Late last year, he released How to Speak Machine, which is kind of like computer science and AI tutorial for designers and other people who haven't kind of spent time studying algorithms at the university. So he, for instance, has very nice points about how big data conclusions need thick data connections to real people. And he goes further to talk about how you need to justify investments in thick data, because coming from like a big technology company context, and big technology companies are kind of good doing things at scale and collect a lot of information about users. We know this very well about all the big corporations nowadays, and he kind of gives a reminder that although doing this kind of elaborate user research might be kind of inefficient, slow, expensive, it's still necessary. As he talks about, that best investors will not only carefully analyze the funds that they are engaged with, but they will fly out and do a visit. And this is exactly kind of combination of thick and big data that also designers should kind of rely on. One thing about the data is that in order to kind of utilize data, you need also, as a researcher, designer, honesty and candor in interpreting the data that you get. There's kind of old truth from Ronald Coase that if you torture the data long enough, it will confess to anything. And this means that the questions that you ask from the data must be kind of well thought in advance, and you kind of need to be able to see that you can twist the similar kind of numbers to different interpretations if you're not careful. One sort of way of thinking that I personally like is to think about that this kind of thick data is something that inspires and validates design, but then on the other hand, big data is something that confirms or invalidates your thinking. What does this mean? What do I mean by this invalidation thing? I'll take an example from last year where we had, of course, last year we had a lot of presentations, but one of them had very can very nicely illustrate what I meant. Juha Lauhamaa from Suunto was talking about how they were developing a new feature or thinking about a new feature for their app, which would involve friend network. But then it turned out that actually 80% of their users didn't have any friends on the platform. So this kind of a little bit reduced their motivation to do any development work in this domain because there would be basically no one to use it. And other thing that can kind of invalidate or sort of like show your own bias as a thinking in design is that to measure how much of the stuff that you're using actually gets, or how much the stuff that you're building actually gets used when it's inside a system. And this is what they did at Suunto, finding out that most of the stuff that they had already built was hardly used by anyone, or if it was used very infrequently. So it kind of questions that what sort of stuff are really worth doing in terms of design and product development. And kind of put this a little bit further, it is kind of known truth that about like 2/3 of all new ideas when they are being tested as part of new products are either equal or worse than the old ones. Here's also some bit of data from the book by Qvik, in which they kind of go through or review different kind of sources regarding how successful the experiments have been, showing that at worst, Netflix reports that only 10% of the stuff that they try out with users actually leads to any kind of change in the system. And kind of final caveat is that there's also a thing called Twyman's law, which states that any figure that looks interesting or different is usually wrong. Also kind of giving further food for thought for anyone who's starting to do experiments and kind of trying to measure things to see if they make any kind of difference. So in short, my kind of personal interpretation of data-driven design was that it's about figures and feelings that have to come together. And that's about it. Now we're going to be talking about the program and how today is going to roll from this point on. This year's theme was excellent services for everyone, which leaves quite a lot of room for interpretation, I must say. And the program has been constructed by myself following kind of 3 ideas: that we have general data-driven design stuff, then we have the theme, and then we've also been welcome to all kind of external contributions. And we're going to have the final presentation this year from Helen, which came through as an open submission. So it's a lot of different kind of curation work. And about this year's theme, excellent services for everyone, I think one way to think about it is that this is not only about inclusivity or accessibility, which are both kind of important themes, particularly this year in designers in EU. Of course, this is kind of important part, and I kind of totally, for instance, I've been recently reading a book by Kat Holmes called Mismatch, which is about like inclusive design. And I wanted to take one thing out of it, because it's a great book to read by designers, for designers, or basically for everyone. It's very accessible by itself. And she has a very nice illustration about what inclusive design might mean. These are kind of 3 principles of inclusive design, which start from recognizing exclusion, learning from diversity, solve for one, extend to many. And the important idea is that basically, from the recognition, you can start building things, designing things that don't intentionally don't accidentally exclude everyone. It's impossible to build things that would be inclusive for everyone, but it's important to know who you are leaving out. And I think this kind of works very well also in the data-driven design context, because kind of taking the combination of the big and thick data, you can kind of arrive at these kind of decisions. I'll take one final example. One I like personally the most. Here in this picture, we'll see kind of early predecessor of a technology that has become very fashionable in a couple of years now. This is a talking book machine invented in US in 1930s, basically created for the blind population to be able to enjoy books, because they couldn't read, and the braille typing thing was still not very popular. It slowly became more and more popular, and nowadays, as you know, audiobooks, äänikirjat in Finnish, have become quite a big business on their own. And I think, like this year, Amazon company Audible released this very kind of, I'd say, like genre-defining new audiobook, or it's rather like adaptation of comics and movies called The Sandman, which sort of nicely blurs boundaries between different type of genres and different, basically creating a whole new format. As an example of what happened when, like almost 80 years ago, people started doing some stuff for a very small minority of people, then we have development, which enables to have kind of very big change in the whole world. Now, I've talked enough about this data, so we'll hear from the speakers about how do you make data speak for everyone. Now, a few words about the program. We are going to today have 3 sessions, morning session, noon session, and afternoon. Each and every talk will last at maximum 25 minutes, and then we're going to have 5 minutes for Q&A. Schedule can be found on the platform, and a few things about the platform. If you are watching this, you found your way to the stage, and that's the main presentation area. There's also interesting space called sessions, which I call the creative zone, because there's nothing you can find, but you can create anything you like there. And another important thing which we provide is the content on the demos area, called Expo, which is accessible during the breaks. The session area called sessions, you can create your own sessions and kind of start custom chats with other conference participants and try out what you can find. Chats, there are chats which I encourage you to use to ask questions from the participants or the speakers. You can find networking under the people tab and kind of ask people to chat one-on-one. What else? One final pro tip is that there's kind of small button which allows you to maximize the video area. That might be useful, and also remember to double click on the video if it seems too small. There's no kind of tooltip, so that's why I'm kind of explaining these things to you, so you don't discover them incidentally by the end of the day. And also one thing is that we have help available on the platform and also outside platform. And I generally think that most of the time the hop-in platform issues are fixed if you use Chrome browser, but we'll try to get by. The platform is not perfect. I think it's my time to conclude this introduction. And I'm hoping that everyone have a great day and we don't kind of experience too many technical glitches over the day. And we will now begin with our first presentation in this morning session, which will come. We have like 3 different Finnish public operations represented in the morning session. We will start with public transportation. We will proceed with national broadcasting and then national postal services. But we will start with HSL, HRT. Tarja Jääskelä and Eva Jakobsson, please welcome. I will now start doing some technology switches, so just wait a second until the ladies get on the stage. And welcome.